Yo, hey everybody, it's Drewberry, and I just wanted to put together some thoughts on some balance changes that we might see in an upcoming patch. I believe there's set to be a patch either this upcoming week, which is usually a Monday or Tuesday night, or likely the week after. They usually do one fairly big balance patch right before the new season to mix things up, and they do one a month. So it kind of seems in line to come quickly here. And I had some thoughts. I thought I'd just throw it together randomly. I was kind of bored, so I just put together some ideas that I'd like to see for some balance changes moving forward. First of all, I do want to say that I actually think Marvel Snap is a pretty well balanced game. There's a lot of cards that might not seem very strong at first, but once you get a full collection, there's always going to be ways to find a slot for that card, find a deck for it. And then if a card feels too strong, there are a lot of tech counter options. If an ongoing card is too strong, then there's Enchantress. If there's an on-reveal card that's too strong, there's Cosmo. So there's always something out there to prevent the card from being too broken and unstoppable most of the time. But that doesn't mean there shouldn't be any changes, and I think I've outlined a few that I feel are reasonable, not totally game-breaking, maybe one, but we'll get to that in a second. This is a quick overview. I have them all laid out here. If you don't want to listen to me talk about why I made these changes and you just wanted to see them, well, I got them right here, and you can end the video. If you want to hear my explanation on each one, I'm going to go into the buffs and the nerfs right now. Oh, and really quickly before we do that, I have to emphasize that this is entirely subjective. I am not a game designer. I don't do balance changes for any kind of games. This is just based on my experiences playing the game and some things I would like to see. But I would love to know what you guys think should be changed in the future in the comments below. If a patch doesn't come this week, maybe I'll do this again later next week, updated with your suggestions. So let me know in the comments. All right, so let's start with the nerfs. I've only got 3 here, and honestly, I don't find them that bad. I just wanted to move it a little bit. I think the worst one I'm going to start with is Sarah. So she is a pool 3 card. She is a 5 cost, 5 power, ongoing. Cards in your hand cost 1 less, minimum of 1. It makes for some really crazy combos, which actually is kind of fun. There are a lot of decks that are enabled, but I think it feels really bad when you played well the entire game and then your opponent just dumps a lot of cards on turn 6 that you can't actually react to efficiently. You see, she does have the ongoing tag, but even if you Enchantress her, it's too late because you're probably doing that on turn 6 and it doesn't matter. Your opponent already got to play everything that they wanted and set up that epic turn 6 big wombo combo play that they were waiting for. So I feel like the lack of counterplay is a bit too much. So what I did, I still like the card though. In essence, it's really cool. You can't play her until 5, so you're not going to get that much value unless you ramp up into her, which is viable as well. What if we kept her ability relatively same? We kept her power the same because we could just mess with that, but let's leave it at 5 for the sake of just keeping that the same. Change it to a minimum of 2. So what does that do? So now if I'm trying to discount my 2 drops, that does nothing. So there's no point in running 2 drops. Now, instead of the play of running a bunch of 2 drops in your deck, so they all cost 1 and you throw them out like crazy, now the play would be to run a bunch of 3 cost cards so that you can play 3 of them on turn 6, which is still very, very good value, but maybe a little bit more difficult to set up, makes you wait a little bit later to play cards. It might not have the burst that you're looking for, you see, because you play this with Bishop or Angela and it just stacks like crazy amounts of power because you're playing so many cards in that single turn. This kind of stops that and only lets you play like 3, let's say. And then another way to use her is if you just use some counter cards and they're discounted. So like Shang-Chi and Killmonger can now be played on the same turn because of Sarah's discount to Shang-Chi. So there's like still those combos available. They're still out there. You can still do a big burst play if you have a bunch of 3 drop, but you can't get too crazy with it with the 2 drops. Okay, and the next one, probably controversial, and maybe it's just based on the most recent location and my experiences, but we have seen the ongoing Spectrum Destroyer deck a lot. I feel like at least every 3rd game I'm seeing this deck, and I'm kind of over it. And I don't think Destroyer's the problem. Yeah, Destroyer's a lot of power. but he's just one card. And sometimes you can just beat that outright. Even if you predict where it's going to be, you have your opponent has turn priority, you Shang-Chi it, something, right? There's a few more counters to that. What I don't feel like can be countered enough is armor. And yes, you can play Enchantress and ruin all of their ongoing abilities, and that is super viable. But I feel like armor just does a little bit too much, because armor shuts down destroy decks, which is a great counter. There needs to always be a tech option against every keyword in the game, so you have armor. But she shuts them down so badly. It feels really bad when you're running a destroy deck. You just about to Bucky Barnes Carnage combo, but then bam, armor hits. You wasted all that energy. And she's got 3 power. What if we just brought her down to 2? She still gets that same reciprocal value of protecting your cards from your own destroyer and whatever destroy mechanics you plan on throwing out. You protect your cards from your opponent's destroy attempts, but you get less power and you fill that position. It's not even that much power. It's just 2 less. I think the ability is fair, and it should be reciprocal. It can't just protect one side, your opponent's or yours. It should be both ways. I just feel like there needs to be a little bit of a power tweak. And speaking of power tweaks, I think Wong needs a bit of a change. Just again, 2 power decrease, because Wong is such a combo enabler. He's insane. And if you make him 5, then he's just never going to get played, because it's just a little bit too hard, a little bit too late to get him out, and you don't get to stack all those crazy on reveals. And he's a fun card. He's fun to use and get all, like, a bunch of Doom bots out, a bunch of Tigers out, a bunch of Ironheart buffs. There's a lot of different things you can do, and he's fun. But I don't think he needs power. You know, like, you're never playing Wong for his 2 power. You're probably trying to get power out at a different location if you're using Wong. So I think it's actually okay that he goes to 0 power. It wouldn't really affect the card negatively, but it just gives your opponent at least a little bit more of an edge to win that location, because you're probably stacking, like, if you stack White Tiger with the Wong, that's not a lot of power. With the nerf, it would just be 1 power. So your opponent at least can think, okay, well, I can win the location he's stacking right now, unless he Black Panthers. But let's just say I can maybe win this one. I just have to win one other one. I think it's just a reasonable change that doesn't actually hurt the card nearly as much as armor might get hurt from -2 power. Still keeps the integrity of his ability. Still would be a staple card in a lot of unrevealed decks, but keeps him a little bit more in line. Again, I think Marvel Snap is fairly balanced right now, and honestly, none of these changes would need to happen, but I would appreciate it if something was done. Not to kill these cards, I like these cards, just minor adjustments to bring them a little bit back down to earth. All right, and then we have our buffs. Okay, I want to kick it off with Wolverine, because he just needs to be 4 power. Like, this card needs to be 4 power. Yesterday, he should have been 4 power on release. When this is discarded or destroyed, play it at a random location. But let's face it, he should be in discard and destroy decks. He should be one of those options you decide to tech in, but he never makes it. He always gets cut. And in pool 1, you probably were putting him in your discard and destroy decks. But let's be honest, there's better options. You were just kind of throwing that in there because he had the keyword, but he wasn't that great of a card. It wasn't working out that often or that well. I did it myself, and pretty early on in my pool 3, once I got a few better destroy cards, Wolverine was out. Once I got a few better discard cards, he was out again. So I think bringing him to 4 power might make it a little bit more reasonable to tech him into your decks. I still don't even think he'd get run all that much, but the idea of that if you had this bouncing around card, I think in destroy decks in particular, he might end up being worth running. And then if you even compare the energy to power ratio, like, there's cards like Lizard, Colleen Wing, like, there's cards out there that have more power than 2-3 stat line and, like, do better things than this guy. So anyways, I just feel like he really deserves that power buff. Let's get to the next one, which is probably the craziest one I have on this list, and that is Rhino. When have you ever seen Rhino played? Be honest. Probably never. And I'm not saying he's a bad card per se. He's just underwhelming. When there's things like Scarlet Witch that you could use who's cheaper, then why would you run in Rhino? Like, I guess because you don't want the RNG of the location, but I think most cases people tech in Scarlet Witch over Rhino. And ruining a location is a big deal. You change it to the ruined location, which does nothing, removes its ability, as his tech says. That can swing games, but it's just a bit of a tempo loss because it's only 3 power for 3 and might even help your opponent out if it's a frustrating location. So I went a little wild. My initial thought was just to bring him to 5 power so he's a little bit more reasonable. I don't think you can bring him to 2 because Scarlet Witch exists. I wouldn't want to bring him to 4 and increase his power a lot. That just seems kind of weird. So what if we made him 0 power, but On reveal, if there are no cards here, destroy this location. So what I mean by destroy comparing to ruin, there's a card in the game, not really, I talked about him in my data mines video, called Galactus. And when he does, he literally destroys the locations. You can no longer play cards at those locations. He's the only one who does that in the game. And I thought Rhino kind of makes sense if he does that. And he costs 0 because he's going to essentially destroy himself once he does it. He runs into the location and boom, everything destroys at that lane. And now you're working with 2 lanes in the game. I think this change would even start making, there would be decks around this, Rhino decks. I think it'd be really interesting to see. You play Rhino, then you play Warpath or something who gets a lot of value from this. Now, I don't know if this is too broken. That's why I made it so that you can only, if there's no cards there, because if cards could be there, you could run this out on 6, destroy all your opponent's cards and just leave 2 locations. So instead, it's a bit of a tempo loss, right? You're paying 3 to destroy a location that your opponent has not invested in. You're not getting a power benefit, and your opponent hasn't committed resources there. They're committing to the other 2 locations that you now have to win. But on the flip side, it becomes just more of a power battle of total power because there's 2 locations. So you either try to win both or you just stack a whole lot at one and hope it's more than your opponent. Anyways, I think it would be really cool to see this in Marvel Snap more often, besides just Galactus. In a controlled environment like this with a condition, I think it'd be really cool. All right, and then there's Namor. I have, since pretty well the beginning, thought that Namor is too weak. Maybe in Pool 1, it doesn't seem that way. It's 10 power. That's nice. There's some locations like Atlantis. He gets to 15 power. He chills by himself, and he just wins the location, right? Not quite. Like 10 power is just not enough in a lot of scenarios, especially in Pool 3 when there's a bunch of other crazy combos that are coming at you. You're just not going to win with 10 power, and there's no way to really support Namor. Maybe you can get an Ironheart buff over there, Spectrum buff, but then we're talking 12. And like, is that enough? Probably not. There's a lot of cards that can just handle locations by themselves and get up to that power total. So I just feel like he falls short. I like his ability. I think it's a very interesting idea to leave locations alone, get a bunch of power out there. But I just feel like he needs a little bit more, which is why I'm giving him the push to his default total to 7, right? So that if you still happen to have a card there, squirrel spawn, whatever, your opponent plays debris, well, at least 7 for 4, that feels a little bit better than 5 for 4, feels so bad. And then the bright side is he can get to 12 if everything works out. He's just such a cool card, has a lot of cool art. I feel like he deserves a little bit of a push. All right, and lastly, we got these 2 guys. So we got Black Bolt, notoriously one of the worst cards in Marvel Snap. People hate this card. On reveal, your opponent must discard the lowest cost card in their hand. Now, I have heard suggestions like increasing his power total, and I thought about that, and I was like, yeah, maybe, but he's already 5'8", and that's a pretty decent stat line in Marvel Snap. You just need a slightly better ability, right? Well, then somebody also, people have mentioned that maybe he should discard the highest cost card in your opponent's hand. And that made me go, whoa, probably not, because that'll be too good and it'll tilt a lot of people who just want to play the really cool 6 drops. And then all of a sudden they're getting discarded. If he becomes meta, like that's just the worst feeling. Please, no. But what if it was a reciprocal effect? See, the problem I have with Black Bolt is he is by nature a discard card because he has that keyword in his text, or a disrupt card, I suppose, but he does have discard, but he doesn't benefit your discard cards. You're discarding your opponent's hand, and that never really helps you out. You want to discard your Apocalypse. You want to discard for Morbius. There's like reasons that you want to discard your own hand. You brought that deck to the table. So why don't we make it so that Black Bolt can actually be added to that deck? So even something that seems like a negative is actually a positive, because now both players must discard the lowest cost card in their hand. Interesting. So it's a bit of an amalgamation between Colleen Wing, who's going to discard the lowest cost card in your hand, and Moon Knight, who discards a card from your hand and your opponent's at random. So, but you know what? We see that actually frequently enough. Think about it this way. Blade and Swordmaster have the exact same effect. Discard a card from your hand. So it's not that unusual that cards will have similar effects. And this combination of both being a 5-drop, 8 power, he might actually see play. And then if you've been able to thin out your hand enough and your lowest cost card is your APOC, well then it's happy days. Even better, this would be a great tool for Hela, because Hela wants to cheat out a bunch of cards, but she has the problem of often discarding herself. Well, if you run a lot of low cost things with high power, then you can discard them and then play Hela safely on 6. So it's not the craziest change in the world, but I actually think it would bring Black Bolt to life and this card needs it. Okay, and lastly, I don't think this card is bad by any means, but I think the archetype could use some help, and that is the move archetype. I love move decks, but they're not consistent, let's face it. And they're telegraphed because one of the biggest payoffs is Heimdall, and he moves all your other cards to the left. But what if you could choose the direction? Would it be broken? Maybe. Maybe, because you just choose the direction that you probably have the best odds at winning at. But then your opponent can never really say, okay, I'm just going to force my opponent to not either play cards on the left with like Professor X, or I'm just going to stack all of my power on the right because I know he's going to shove everything to the left. Well, what if you can't really read that situation? Instead, you're just left thinking, okay, I have to assess where my opponent has played his card, right? If you see somebody playing like Vulture in multiple man and Torch on the left, well, you're probably thinking they're going to Heimdall to the right. They're going to choose to go to the right and vice versa. So it's just a little bit less telegraphed, and you have to do a little bit more analysis of the game state to know where the Heimdall is going to shift things. And we've actually never seen this before, right? A choose mechanic in Marvel Snap. I think the game is just set up for it beautifully. You play the card, the choose option comes up, you choose it, it then is stuck on the card, and then when it's revealed, it reveals your choice. To me, that just makes sense, and I feel like it should be in the game, and it's really easy with Heimdall. You play Heimdall on your respective turn. It says, do you want to go left? Do you want to go right? And you click one of them, and then boom, you click end turn, and then it happens. I've always said that I thought there should be a Heimdall in the game that makes things go to the right so that your opponent doesn't know which one you're running. But what if you just had the choice? I think move decks would actually be competitive, and this could bring them to life, and I would love to see this change. So anyways, that is just like some quick patch prediction or balance changes that I would love to see in the game. Like I said, I am not a game developer. I don't know how to properly balance games. I can only speak on my experiences alone, but I would love to know what you guys think and some changes that you think should be in the game that I missed. Let me know in the comments below, and let me know if any of these you really like or you'd hate to see. I'd love to hear the feedback. Thank you as always for watching, and I will catch you guys next time.